great to see everybody here and taking these debates. Sorry, do you mind using the mic? I was just staring at the mic and not picking up. I'm very sorry. Yeah, I'm a seasoned media professional. Anyway, Hamza has just brilliantly told you all about the lies. And the first thing I wanted to do was to talk about why the media lie. And I guess the headline answer is that the media tell lies because they have an intimate relationship with capitalist power, that they are an instrumental part of representing the interests of a dominant class which presides, as we know, over a violent, unequal and profoundly oppressive system. So that they rule both through the use of hard military force and power, but they also use ideas, and they, I think, they need to tell lies, to turn the world upside down, to attempt, and this is the crucial thing, to attempt to pull the wool over our eyes. And I'm going to try and make sense of that in the next few minutes. So that means that the media, and this is a big umbrella term, but I'm talking about anything from the biggest tech companies, individual media moguls and the empires they preside over, whether that's Rupert Murdoch or Larry Ellison, a particularly important US media mogul, or its public service media like the BBC, or, as Hamza was saying, its so-called liberal media like The Guardian. All of them not only act in their own strategic interests, whether that's about making money or exerting and extending influence, but crucially that they are part of a broader project, a broader system to normalize, to naturalize existing social relations. So that means I think we need to talk about the media's ideological role. An ideology for Marx refers to the way in which particular sets of ideas about the world are used to justify, to do two things really, both to justify the existing order through distorting reality, but also to amplify the very real distortions of reality itself. So ideology helps to disguise the real dynamics, the real horrors of capitalist power, so that there ends up being a very big gap between what things appear to be and what their real dynamics are. And the media play this central ideological role, helping to form, transmit, debate ideas, but, as I will get onto in a second, also that there are answers, that there are responses, there are arguments about the media's ideological role. And so, just this week, there are, Hamza's gone through it, the endless, horrendous, insulting examples that we have about the way in which the media perform their role. There's just one of them, because it was just so, I couldn't help but resist. The media have been absolutely instrumental in normalizing the fact that we are, in the UK, at war and need, therefore, without any kind of discussion, to rapidly and significantly increase defense spending. And there is no debate about this in the mainstream media. Literally no debate about this. So you had a story this week which was, given everything else that was going on this week, quite incredible. They still found time or space to have headlines about the fact that they just found Russian submarines near the coast, and I say near because that's their quote. It wasn't in Brighton, it was near UK waters, spying on undersea cables. And you think, well, yeah, okay, they probably were doing that, it's not a great thing, as if the UK military would ever do such a thing. And of course, you just look at the MOD's website, and it's filled with all the operations that are taking place in the Arctic, with very James Bond-sounding names, which are not reported on, but which are NATO and UK exercises, literally spying on the Russians. But that's in our own national interest. So there are crucial institutions, that's just one example, so that people would think, what other option do we have but to shift money from the NHS into the military? So their role is to normalize the unequal, oppressive condition of capitalism. And there's an argument which is, Hamza was talking about the media's I can't remember the word used, but it was, the media's failures in all of this. And there is an argument that actually the media are very successful in precisely their ideological role. And because of that, there are many people in this room, and I hope you speak and raise questions about this, who say, well, why are you having a meeting on the media? They just tell lies, so why bother? The number of people who say to me, why are you so obsessed with the BBC when you know they're telling lies? I never watch or listen to the BBC. I never listen to any of the stuff that Hamza was just talking about. I've got my own sources of information. Now, I agree with that, except I think you're missing a very big part of the picture, which is that the mainstream media still matter. I wish they didn't, but they do. And so we still have to engage with these arguments. And you hear, there's so many different ways of talking about this. I mean, one thing is people just say, yeah, but everyone gets their news online, which does drive me insane when I hear that. Because who do you think is responsible for the vast majority of what is consumed online? Like it's this other world in which media moguls aren't interested. This is the bad news, and there is lots and lots of data about this. You can drill down into the data, but first of all, the BBC is still by far the most consumed media platform in this country. That is a fact. Then you look at, obviously it depends on demographics, but a younger demographic clearly goes online, disproportionately according to the rest of the population for their information. So it's like, well, why do you have to talk about the mainstream media? But who do you think accounts for most of the most used traffic online? It's not just Counterfire. I wish that it was, but it really, really isn't. It's not left media. It's actually, again, the BBC, it's the Sun the Mail have one of the world's biggest online operations, and their content is felt very much in this apparently separate space called online. That we have to engage with that kind of media power, whether we like it or not. Third point is that the impact that I'm talking about, this is a real impact of the mainstream media, but, and this is such an important point, and I hope you don't think I'm contradicting myself, is that this impact isn't solid or immovable or irrepressible. That's the crucial takeaway from all of this, because the media is subject to the same tensions, the same contradictions that exist in the rest of society. Marx, as you know, argued that capitalism was a profoundly and necessarily contradictory system, marked by perennial, permanent tensions between workers and bosses, between socially useful production and production for profit. Contradictions that help drive society forward, but also expose the very real tensions in it. And the Italian revolutionary Antonio Gramsci took this up when he talked about contradictory consciousness. That yes, we are by and large impacted by what we consume in the media, but there are real contradictions in how we understand the world at the same time. And this means a couple of things. First, it means, I think, that not all media workers are part of some seamless conspiracy to tell lies. I mean, please don't misquote me. I'm not disagreeing with Hamza. There will have to be an accounting for, with many people, with senior journalists, with editors, with proprietors who have facilitated war crimes. But I mean, you look inside the BBC, as the organisation that has done the most in that direction, there's fury on the ground inside the BBC. There are people, we should have Karishma Patel up here, well, we have had Karishma speaking with us many times, who is someone who walked out the BBC after trying to organise in it. There is a kind of small, significant rank-and-file rebellion in the BBC of people who are disgusted by the BBC's coverage of Gaza, but they're scared. There is an absolute atmosphere of people, scared to talk out, so lots of people just speak anonymously about this. But it just gives you an insight. The people at the BBC face the same levels of exploitation, of workplace bullying, as people in other kinds of jobs. The media are not just a separate weird, isolated part of the world. So they are subject to contradictions as well. And the second thing about that is about us as audiences, and this may be more contentious point with some of you, but I think it means, thinking back to contradictory consciousness, I don't think it's accurate to say that audiences, that we are simply brainwashed by what we consume. And the idea of brainwashing is something, maybe people just say it off the cuff, that the media just, funnily enough, sometimes you hear people dismissing the mainstream media in the same sentence. They say that people are brainwashed by them, other people. I may not be brainwashed, but other people are. And I just don't think that's an adequate way of looking at it. Yes, we are impacted, but the contradictions in our lives and the contradictory ideas we hold mean that it's not this seamless process of just being brainwashed. How do I know this? Well, it's because, and this is such a, this is not the world's most scientific, but it's important. Just look at opinion polls. And then look at the coverage on front pages and at the top of the ratings. Take many of the crucial questions in the world today around, for example, public ownership of key utilities. The vast majority of the UK population support bringing back key utilities into public ownership. When was the last time you saw a front page or a BBC or ITV headline on this? All right, in the National, it's true, they do. The National is a very unusual newspaper. But actually, the media are well behind that. The fact is that even Jeremy Corbyn, vilified for years across the media, got between 10 and 12 million people voting for Corbyn's Labour. Even with the stuff that Hamza's been talking about on Palestine, the vast majority of the British population still support Palestinian sovereignty over Israel's right to defend itself, as the media so often put it. So the media are well behind the British population. So I don't think brainwashing is the right way of looking at it. So I better conclude by saying, well, how do we break open these contradictions? And I think that's where it's people's experiences in struggle that really count. Marx said famously that consciousness does not determine life, life determines consciousness. And the fact is that in our lives we are forced to resist, to struggle, to question, to organise. And when we do that, this is precisely the point if you're in the room when Lindsay was talking in the last session, that's when things start to change. That's when we start to ask fundamental questions about institutions like the media and to attempt to go beyond them. That's when we should be talking about our own channels of communication. And that's when the audiences genuinely are there to move on from the ideological bankruptcy of mainstream media into new types of communication. So that's why it's vital that we throw all our energies into building things like the anti-imperialist movements, to Palestine resistance, to climate change, protests and so on, because that is where. And if we do it, it's very interesting. We find that the media start to get slightly nervous. He's too polite to say this, but Hamza, in one of his many tweets this week, challenged the BBC over one of the examples he gave, and they, in my opinion, very stupidly, the press office, responded to him, which is the most stupid thing to do. His tweet got something like 750,000 views, and they get a bit nervous, and they responded very badly. And actually, then there's a pile-on with all of this. You can tell that they're nervous, that things, can start to be opened up. So it's vital both to put the pressure on the media, but for us to start to be able collectively to break free from the media's grip on our world, to engage in the movements that we know pose new questions and demand that we go beyond a mainstream media that will never serve our purposes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Des. That was excellent. I just want to make a quick correction.